Welcome to Dimensions in Chumash by Rabbi Immanuel Bernstein, part of our collective Journeys in Torah. Welcome to Dimensions in Chumash. I'm Steve Geller. Once again, Rabbi Bernstein is going to take us on a guided tour back in time, and we'll walk through the desert camp and see what Klal Yisrael saw during these pivotal parshios in the Torah. This week in our parsha, Moshe assembled the entire congregation of Bnei Yisrael and said to them, Eila hadvarim asher tziva Hashem la'asos osam. These are the words that Hashem has commanded you to do. Our parsha describes the construction of the Mishkan and its various components, but before presenting the Mishkan, Moshe first gives us two psukim about observing Shabbos. The message being that although the people are about to begin the very lofty endeavor of constructing the Mishkan, Shabbos observance takes precedence, and no work for the Mishkan can be done on Shabbos. It's interesting to note a difference in the way the topics of Shabbos and the Mishkan are introduced. Although observing Shabbos is one idea, it's introduced with the plural Eila hadvarim. These are the things. By contrast, the building of the Mishkan, which the Torah describes in very intricate detail that take up the rest of the parsha, is introduced with the singular Ze hadavar. This is the matter. What's behind these two counterintuitive introductions? Many commentators note that in the previous parsha, chapter 31, psukim 1 through 13, when the idea that building the Mishkan does not override the Shabbos, it's presented by Hashem to Moshe with the Mishkan mentioned first and Shabbos second. There it's taken to mean that building the Mishkan must stop on Shabbos. In our parsha, when communicating exactly the same idea, Moshe reverses the order, placing Shabbos first. Well, what is this telling us? In order to answer these questions, Rabbi Bernstein starts with a comment of the Meshech Chachma, who notes that we find two different ways in which the Torah refers to the holiness of the Jewish people. Earlier in Parshas Mishpatim, the pasuk says, "Va'anshe kodesh tihiyon li," you shall be men of holiness to me. In Parshas Re'eh it says, "Ki am kadosh ata," you are a people sanctified to Hashem. What's the difference between kodesh and kadosh? The Meshech Chachma, based on a comment of Rashi in the Gemara Kedushin, explains the difference as follows. Kadosh is an adjective and describes something that itself is inherently holy. Kodesh is a noun referring to the concept of holiness. Something that is of Kodesh is associated with that holiness, but is not itself inherently holy. Let's illustrate each of these two categories. Imagine two items that can be consecrated for the Beis HaMikdash. An animal can be consecrated to be brought as a carbon. This animal attains an inherent sanctity and is thus called kadosh. An item can be consecrated for the funds of the Beis HaMikdash to be sold and its value used for the avoda. This item is not inherently holy, but rather holy by association, of kodesh. Well, is there a practical halachic difference between these two categories? There sure is. An object that is kodesh, holy by association, can be replaced as the sanctified item. It could be sold or it could be redeemed. By contrast, an object that is intrinsically holy can never lose its status or be replaced. Well, okay, but what does this have to do with our discussion? The Gemara in Bereishis tells us that after the Eigel, the sin of the golden calf, when we narrowly averted a divine decree calling for our destruction, Moshe requested of Hashem that he pledge never to replace us with another people. And Hashem granted this request. It turns out that prior to this episode, Bnei Yisrael could have lost our unique sanctified status. But after Moshe's request was granted, this sanctity could no longer be lost. This historic development, says the Meshech Chachma, is reflected in the two psukim we saw earlier referring to the Jewish people. The pasuk in Mishpatim refers to the period before the Eigel. That's why the people are referred to as Anshe Kodesh, people of holiness, reflecting the idea that our sanctity could be replaced. The pasuk in Re'eh describes the people after the Eigel. Notice the term used here is Am Kadosh, a holy people, beautifully confirming the permanent and non-transferable nature of our intrinsically sanctified status. It's just amazing. Let's now ask, how is this change from associative holiness, kodesh, to intrinsic holiness, kadosh, brought about? Rabbi Immanuel will answer this question by bringing us an insight from his father, Rabbi Isaac Bernstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. He brings us a fascinating discussion of the Beis HaLevi based on numerous sources in Chazal. The Beis Halevi develops the idea that there was a fundamental difference between the two sets of luchos that were given to Moshe. The first set of luchos contained in some form a representation of the entire Torah, not only what we know as the written Torah, but the oral Torah as well. The second set of luchos contained only the written Torah. At that moment, the oral Torah became entirely oral in nature with no written representation on the luchos at all. The Beis Halevi asks, what are the implications of the oral Torah being present on the first luchos but let off the second? He answers that as long as both the written and oral Torah were written on the luchos itself constituted the entire standalone repository of Torah. So even as the Jewish people learned Torah and were connecting with holiness, they were effectively an accessory to holiness, basically an ark that houses a Torah scroll. However, once the oral Torah was no longer written on the luchos, the repository of the oral law became the hearts and minds of the Jewish people ourselves. We became like a Torah scroll. We were no longer of Anshe Kodesh, people of holiness, an accessory to holiness, but rather an Am Kadosh, a holy object, an inherently sanctified people. How profoundly beautiful is that? So now, putting these two ideas together, Rabbi Bernstein suggests that the shifting of the oral Torah after the Eigel from the luchos to Bnei Yisrael ourselves, as described by the Beis Halevi, was the means through which we graduated from associative holiness to intrinsic holiness. And as the Meshech Chochmah explained on this point, assuring our eternal status as Hashem's chosen people. This might also give us a new insight into the statement of Rav Yochanan in the Gemara in Gittin that Hashem only sealed a covenant with Israel over the oral law, as it says, al pi, for based on these words, I have sealed a covenant with you. The pasuk the Gemara cites is from the end of Parshas Kisisa, after the second luchos had been written. For the eternal promised connection between Hashem and Israel is based on the shifting of the oral Torah to the people themselves, thereby elevating us to a status of intrinsic holiness. In light of all this, we can appreciate that an integral part of securing the lasting rehabilitation of the Jewish people came through connecting us to the oral Torah. Perhaps we can now explain why, although Moshe was originally told by Hashem first about the Mishkan and then Shabbos, at this stage he reversed the order and spoke about Shabbos first. The Mishnah in Haggadah characterizes Shabbos with the term kehararim hatluyim bisara, like mountains that are suspended by threads. This is to say, a huge body of laws based on a very small amount of psukim in the Torah. In this regard, Shabbos represents a mitzvah whose details are predominantly known to us through the oral law. This is completely opposite to the laws of the Mishkan, all of which are described in great detail in the written Torah. So as Moshe addresses the people for the first time after they were granted forgiveness for the Eigel, he immediately engages us in Shabbos, the area of the Torah that will activate our new status of intrinsic holiness, which will grant our enduring and eternal status as Hashem's people through the oral Torah. And we can now return to the question we started out with about alternating the order of Shabbos and the Mishkan. We saw that Shabbos, which is discussed in only 2 psukim, is introduced with the plural, these are the things, while the Mishkan, which is discussed at length over dozens of psukim, is presented with the singular, this is the matter. Rav Yehonasan Eibshitz, in his commentary Tiferes Yehonasan, explains that the use of the plural form for Shabbos reflects the fact that it's derived from 2 sources, both the oral and the written Torah. By contrast, the Mishkan is presented with the singular form since it derives entirely from this one area of the written Torah. And we can also appreciate now that the reason this distinction between the two is being highlighted here is because it's the cause of Moshe's reversal of these topics, choosing to open with Shabbos so as to elevate the people to their inherent Kedusha by way of the oral law that Hashem gave us exclusively. Just an amazing explanation that covers so many questions that we had. Rabbi Immanuel, bringing us the brilliance of his father, is himself an incredible treasure for us all. And just the latest reason that you should like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and hit the share button to paste the link to this video into emails and texts to family and friends. It's our inherent Kedusha that brings us our love for Torah and the great mitzvah of Talmud Torah to share it.